And if
All right, we're back in the saddle. War Room, the Hockey Podcast. It's been a week or two, so our apologies. Some things going on, but we are back with it. Episode 96 this week, inching ever closer to that 100 mark. Head to the necessary social media platforms. Let me get this out of the way before we start. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, War Room, the Hockey Podcast, at War Room, the Hockey Podcast. Wherever you find us, hit subscribe, rate, and review. Hit the notification bell so you're alerted, and enjoy. Episode 96, War Room, the Hockey Podcast. The season is officially underway. Officially.
96. And we're underway. Good.
Officially. Few things to talk about. We'll just see where things go. I won't dare say it's going to be a short one because it really never is.
No, they never are. Right now, let me just get this part out of the way. There's a couple things that aren't necessarily newsworthy items. I mean, they're not like time-sensitive items. Believe as of today, as of this recording, 15 guys in the National Hockey League vaccinated, test positive, ineligible to play. Do with that information as you see fit, but that's what's going on. Every day it's a new guy, and they're all vaccinated.
All I'll say about it, you heard me, I ranted and raved before we hit record, but all I'll say about it while recording, and this is all I'm going to say about it, if you don't see, and I really want to be careful to not say it's my way or the highway. I don't want to be like a leftist idiot in that regard, but facts are facts nonetheless. And if you don't see the hypocritical BS with this whole thing about get fully vaccinated, otherwise you can't play, but now that you're fully vaccinated, we still can test you. And if you have a positive test, you can't play. If you don't see the hypocritical bullshit problem with that, then all due respect, but really I don't care about respect at that point. You're too stupid to listen to us or to really care. So just move on. We're fine, and just go stick your head in the sand. But that it's a big problem if you don't with all that shit, and it's got to stop.
Yep. So the other debacle that just will not go away, and mark my words, it's going to get worse before it gets better, is Jack Eichel.
Jack Eichel, yep.
It is a mess. And calling it a mess is as polite as I can be. This is a guy who has a $10 million AAV. He has a neck injury that has yet to be treated. They're asking the moon for him. He's an elite player, one of the top players in the league when he's healthy. If he's not healthy, he may be worth a fourth rounder. Who knows? But right now, who's going to give up anything more than a conditional pick for him? And if that's the case, Jack Eichel will not play this year. In 21-22, he will not play. If they can get rid of him, which I think everybody wants, including Eichel's camp, everybody wants him out of Buffalo. If they get rid of him for a conditional pick, the conditional pick probably won't be evaluated until the end of next year, because he won't play this season. What if next season he can only play 30 games? That conditional pick's got to slide down and down and down if that's the case. And you won't know that till the end of the season at 22-23. So then the conditional pick becomes either a first rounder or two first rounders or a third or a fourth. Now your rebuild in Buffalo is just kicked 2 or 3 years further down the road before you get a draft pick, let alone an NHL ready player. So right now it's been 8 months, 10 months since Eichel played, and it may be another year.
Here's your other problem with it. Buffalo is refusing to retain salary.
Right.
Which is an ignorant thing to do. They're refusing to retain salary. And the reality of it is if you're trying to offload him, especially with everything going on, you're going to have to. There's just no other way around it. His cap hit and everything is too high for him to not play for whatever team he's traded to because of his injury issues. So You trade him, he still doesn't really get in the lineup. If he does, he may or may not stay healthy. And oh, by the way, you're taking on a 9 or $10 million cap hit, whatever he is, from a team that's not going to retain any salary. Colorado was in on Jack Eichel. They wanted him and McKinnon to be the 1-2 center punch.
Yep.
The issue, Colorado halted because Buffalo wouldn't retain salary.
Correct.
You've got to retain salary in this situation. Under normal circumstances, I think Jack Eichel is the type of player where you can offload him. You don't need to retain salary. You can give up these pieces, and he's that kind of guy for you to help you win hockey games. But with everything going on right now, you've got to retain salary, and you've got to figure out the medical issues. You do those things, and you can move him. But the reality of it is, you've backed yourself into a corner now. Both Eichel and the Sabres. It's no longer a one is wrong, the other is right. They're both in the shits with this. Both of them have backed the team and Eichel and everybody into a corner to where now all you can really do to get out of it is either wait until Eichel's contract is up, whenever that is, and have him leave and walk and sign elsewhere, or move him for a conditional pick just to be done with it. But that's all you can do, and especially when you're not going to retain salary. You've got to retain salary in this situation, and their refusal to do so is making it worse.
Yep. So, like, if you're Colorado or if you're Anaheim, who has also been rumored to be in pretty active talks with him, you give up a great young prospect, a high draft pick. You get this guy, so you're taking on his $10 million. You can LTIR him for this season and avoid that problem, but after the end of this year, then what? Either he can play and you've got a player that's now, a full-time daily part of your roster and your rebuild or your cup run or whatever your situation is, or he's still banged up. Nobody can figure out how to make the neck issue go away. He's good for 35 or 40 games, and you've got a $10 million hit for somebody who's in the shop all the time. That's the great unknown. This has been handled so poorly from the start. I mean, he should have been out of there a long time ago. He should have been getting treatment a year ago or Christmas last year when this really started to surface. He might have got clearance to play by May or June. Who knows? But now you've just kicked it down the road another 6 months, and he still can't. He's no closer to playing today than he was last March.
Yep.
And for an asset like this, it's absolutely ridiculous. I feel bad for the organization. It was handled poorly. I feel bad for Eichel's camp. He wants to play. He wants to get healthy. It was handled poorly. Everybody's got their hands dirty in this deal. And it's really a shame because he's a bring you out of your seats kind of player when he's ready, when he's able to go. So I wish for the league and for him and for everybody involved, for Buffalo to get out of the doldrums. I hope for everyone's sake that this gets fixed soon, but it's not even begun yet. So tough situation for sure.
Early on too, here in this season, we're facing a question officiating wise. I want to get your thought on it. What's your thoughts on the Landeskog hit on Dak that got him suspended?
I didn't like that hit. I said at the time that I like Landy, and I'm all for finishing checks, and me, but I did not like that hit. I thought when Dak went to one knee that Landy should have tried to let up. At least the least you can do, since your momentum's already carrying to him, is put an arm out and try to protect yourself from taking him into the boards. The finish was the problem. I know it happens at a very, very high rate of speed, and most people don't experience, but I didn't like it. I thought the suspension was fair under the circumstances. He should have let off.
Agreed. My take on it, agreed. My take on it, however, is does this point to, and it's a rhetorical question mainly, but does this point to some of the major inconsistencies of player safety that we've talked about? Was it a suspendable hit? Yes. Should he have been suspended? Yes. Should he have let up? Yes. Was it a bad hit? Yes. But on the scale of things we've seen over the years, of things that weren't suspended, that were merely just fined or given a minor penalty for, was it, in at least in that context, was it over the top? Because, and simply because, and this is not, everybody here knows that I'm an Avalanche fan, but this is not me tooting their horn and jumping to their defense. It was a suspendable hit, 100% agreed. I'm just playing devil's advocate here of, did they go over the top with it with a 2-game suspension for still a shoulder-to-shoulder type finish, when we've seen a lot worse with a lot less?
For one thing, to answer your question, although it is kind of rhetorical, this was his second suspense. Am I right?
He's been suspended once before, yeah.
Okay. So I think that he probably gets a game if it's his first one. He gets 2 in this case. I'm okay with it in that sense. But remember, too, that as far as officials are concerned, as far as the league, player safety, the PA, the Board of Governors, the way guys talk about how they're playing and what they can and cannot do in preseason and during the summertime when the rule changes are taking effect, you really, to compare this to anything except today is unfair. There is too much of a shift in philosophy, in actual tangible rules, in the way suspensions are handed out. And I have to believe, although I'm not privy to the firsthand conversations, I have to believe that the league and the PA are communicating clearly through the officials and through the Board of Governors what we will be suspending and what we won't, what we're going to be calling, like the cross-check penalty now. These things are being communicated clearly enough that the players and the coaching staffs should know better. And if that's not the case, someone tell me, but I believe everybody knows. As opposed to, if you looked at highlights from 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you'd say this is not a suspension. At 25 years ago, it wasn't even a penalty. But now I think you can only compare it to this season. You can only compare it now to 3 or 4 games into this season. And these things are always evolving. Remember, as we always say on here, the officials don't make up what is and is not a penalty. George Peros doesn't decide what is and what is not a suspension. They are all dealt the standards by the Board of Governors and by the PA. So do they always get it exactly right and exactly consistent call to call? No, for sure. But they try. That's
any surprises here 2 or 3 games in? So we can transition here in a little bit.
Yeah, a good question. Certainly, Montreal being winless, New York Islanders being winless. Yikes! Columbus has got 2 wins. Buffalo's got 2 wins. Minnesota's on top of that division after 2 games. Yeah, a lot of surprises so far. Absolutely.
I don't personally. I don't give a lot of stock to it this early, just simply because nowadays with so much parity in the league.
Yeah.
With and then the fact, like 2019, St. Louis was in last place in the entire National Hockey League, not just the Western Conference, the entire National Hockey League at the New Year mark.
Yep.
They won the Stanley Cup. So it's important to get out to a good start. Whether you have a specific team you cheer for or you're just a fan of the game, it's important to get off to a quick start. I personally don't give a lot of stock to whether you're 0-2 or you're 2-0 early on, just simply because, especially the past few years, you're finding your footing again with crowds in the building and with the levels of energy, all this stuff.
Yep.
You're likely to see, the Islanders, the Avalanche, Vegas, these teams start to make a jump and separate themselves as things move forward here.
Oh,
It
yeah.
might be a 500 start for a couple weeks, right? But those are the types of teams. Pittsburgh's been playing well. We'll see if they hold on. But teams like the Islanders, Tampa, the Panthers, even Colorado, potentially based on our predictions, Philadelphia, these teams start to kind of put it together and separate themselves as things move forward. So I try not to give too much stock to, ooh, this goaltender let that goal in. Oh, they're 0-2. Oh, all that kind of stuff this early on.
St. Louis being an outlier, certainly nobody wants to be in last place overall at Christmas time and presume you're going to win the Stanley Cup. That's happened once. And obviously nobody would like to be 0-3 to start the season. They'd all like to be 3-0. If you use that as a means to motivate yourself, then great. Be 0-3, your goaltender's struggling, your special teams are struggling, your stars aren't scoring, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. Motivate yourself that way. If you start 3-0, keep building on it. Whatever the game has dealt you, always deal with it positively. But as you know, we talk about this every season, the rule of thumb and statistically borne out is that around US Thanksgiving, around that 10 or 12 game mark, if you are in the playoffs around US Thanksgiving, you have an 85, high 80s chance that you're going to be in the playoffs at the end of the year.
Yep.
If you're not in, the chances are 85-15 against you that you're going to get in. And that's just statistically borne out every single season. Certainly it happens, but you don't want to tempt fate. So surprises, no, but a lot of teams looking at themselves in the mirror just 2 or 3 games in. You mentioned parity, right?
Yep.
The 2 points is just as important in October as it is in April. So don't get to April where you have to win 4 out of 5 to slip into the playoffs. Start now. And that's the urgency that the veterans and the coaching staffs are trying to communicate to everybody.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk real quick, and I'll pull out the fancy whiteboard here for this. But and the hope is to get whiteboards its own segment here at some point. But for the sake of this, and these markers are not working with me, but.
So for about 6 or 7 years after I quit coaching, every suit jacket I put on still had dry markers in it in the pocket. That's, first of all, I don't wear them very often after I quit, but
dry markers and gum, right?
Absolutely can't coach without them.
Okay, well, these markers are not working, so I'm going to hold this thing up, and we're just going to point for right now. Developmental hockey. Let's see if everybody remembers this. Okay. Forgive the glare, but okay. So from about right there, out, over, and out. What did we used to call that? Everybody with me now. The house, right? What did we not do in that area?
Or anywhere else on the ice, for that matter.
Anywhere else on the ice, but in that area, which is your own end, what did we not do?
Stare at the puck.
Not just stare at the puck, but we did not throw the puck right up the middle. Right?
Generally true, yeah.
Right?
On your own.
I used to talk about it all the time when I coached. I used to talk about it all the time with my kids when I coached. Basically, this is like an incredibly strong current, right? That's the metaphor I gave. You throw the puck up this area, it's going to just come right back. You don't go in the middle.
Yeah.
And how many times do we see teams with 8? Yeah.
Okay.
How many times do we see teams with an $80 million, right? $80 million payroll. And we see teams throwing the puck up the middle of the ice. We see 5 guys standing right in here, facing the net, staring at the puck.
Yep.
Tell me how that works. Now, I say that, and we'll get arguments of, but it does work. They're millionaires. They're professionals. They're this. It does. Well, okay. But the point is, how does that work? How do you come in as well? How do you come in three across? 3 across.
I had that explained to me about a month ago by
And one defenseman can cover you 3 across.
right, or at least two. And I had that explained to me. I still don't get it. I was never much of a real X's and O's guy to begin with. I was more simple than that, but I don't get it. And I remember watching just last night, watched what the highlights looked like in Dallas at Ottawa. Ottawa wins 3-2, 5 goals scored, 5 times. The defensive team was in the right position. They were inside the puck. They were on the right side of the play. And 5 times when it went in the net, nobody was looking behind them or to their side. Now, in defense of that, as you know, even though you didn't play a lot of defense, as a defenseman, if you've heard a hockey player interviewed at intermission anytime in the last 30 years, you hear the same thing. Well, we got to get pucks deep. We got to get pucks behind their defense. We got to turn their defensemen and get on our forecheck. Standard procedure, standard sentences in every single interview. The reason that works is because when you get the puck behind them, and as a defenseman, you have to turn your back on the other 9 guys and pick up the puck and then try to figure out how to get, where you're going to find an open guy to pass to, or where you're going to find a place to put the puck that will not become a turnover. It's harder when you have everything behind you and the puck in front of you. So that's the same logic as a forward who is standing at his own hash marks, watching the puck behind the net while the defenseman slips in from the point past him and picks up a pass. And to watch the puck and be mindful of where the puck's going and to watch where everybody is behind you and to the sides of you is really difficult. There's no way around it. There's no X's and O's or video magicry that makes that happen. You still have to see the puck and you have to see where your guys are. And the only way to do it without turning your back is to turn your shoulders such that I can still see the puck over here and I can still see my guy over here. And you don't have to have that front to back. You can have more of a 180 or 150 degree view and see most of what's going on with you. But that's why it happens. And that's why teams take advantage of it. But you're
100%.
right.
Speaking of turnovers, 2 games in for most teams, in how many games I've seen of the games that have been played, I can't tell you how many turnovers I've seen in the 2 no turnover areas, which is the blue lines.
Yep. Defensive blue line, offensive blue line. Never.
And how many times did you, with me growing up, or any coach who actually knows what they're talking about, tell their kids at the blue lines, don't F around with it.
Yeah.
But how many times with these professional athletes on $80 million payrolls do we see guys get right up to the blue line? 4 others have to come to a complete stop because Kirill Kaprizov, or whatever the hell you want to name him, or anybody else decides he wants to go for a little skate.
Yep. While everybody stands still.
So you got either a big turnover or your man is offside.
Yep. And Evan, what you're saying there is, especially at the blue line, at the other team's blue line, when you should be getting it deep or at least getting it in, now not only are your 4 other guys, your teammates are all standing still, they can't get in on the forecheck if you are successful in getting it deep. They also can't get back on the back check if you turn it over. You're standing still and it's dead. I don't get that, and
I don't get the power play entries.
No, I've never adapted that.
Power play entry. Start down on your end. You swing up, drop pass. Okay, swing up, drop pass back to a guy skating full speed. You move up, then you got 4 guys coming up like this, and then they all come to a complete stop right at the blue line, while you dance your way in.
I'm not okay. I'm not.
And how many times do we see 2-minute power plays go to waste with no real entry time or zone time, no real quality zone entries, because all you can really do here is then turn it over, throw it deep, or come in, circle, block shot, and back this way.
Again, if you have to put it deep, Evan, when you get to that blue line, even on the power play, if you're left with no other option but to throw the puck deep, your 3 forwards or 2 forwards and a defenseman are standing still at the blue line. They are not forecheckers. They're standing still. I don't understand that, but a lot of people that get paid a lot of money to study video and design fancy stuff use it every single night. So who am I?
Right. Yeah. We're just sitting here talking about it on a podcast while they're out doing it. So there is that aspect, but it baffles me that you're hammered home that you're not going to go anywhere in the game of hockey unless you pick up on the developmental side, the X's and O's, the real important stuff. And then you see $80 million payrolls completely throwing out the window. It just,
when I look at a team, we talk about this a lot. We talk about coaches. We talk about the guys. We've spent a lot of time over the first 95 episodes talking about teams like Rick Tockett's team in Arizona that played so well, Rod Brindamore's team in Carolina playing so well, Barry Trotz, Mike Sullivan, Jared Bednar, guys at the top of their game, Quenneville and Paul Maurice, and how fundamentally sound they are. When you watch a team play in all 3 zones, with and without the puck, in all situations, power play, kill, 5-on-5, fundamentals are what you look for in not just whether the coach is able to get through to guys, but if the guys are able to get through to each other. Because as you know, a coach can talk forever. The players tune him out. You've got a minute or 2 before you lose track of what the coach is saying. It comes down to what the players communicate with each other. If they're fundamentally sound, you can see it a mile away. The little things, the 10 fundamental details that you should always remember, when you've got them, you're hard to beat, even if you don't have much talent. If you don't have them, you really struggle to win, even if you have superior talent on your roster. And this is what takes me back to what you're saying now. Turning your back on the puck, turning your back on your guy, turning the wrong way, turnovers at the blue line. Ugly, 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 man.
Yeah, agreed. Well, folks, that kind of covers everything I had in mind to talk about. Is there anything you want to talk about real quick before we decide to close out, finish up this week? We're 2 or 3 games into the season, the new season. We've talked about pretty much major headlines, the BS COVID stuff, the Jack Eichel situation, some X's and O fundamentals there. But unfortunately, 2 games in, there's not a lot to talk about yet. So
something kind of gets me, and I would have to go back and see. Maybe I'm not a big analytics guy either, so I don't know what the stats would tell you on this. But it seems like there is an awful lot of injury time being lost right now, 2 games into the season. 1 week in, and you've got Kucherov out. You've got Quentin Byfield out. Every team is losing guys every night to injuries. I don't remember having played for 3 or 4 days and having this kind of man games lost to injury so quickly. You think people are in better shape when they come to camp. People aren't worn out and fatigue isn't playing a factor. What's your take? I see is it my imagination or am I seeing more injuries?
There's a good number of injuries. I mean, I
probably should have looked a bunch of stuff up before I said that. But
it's hard to critique it and pick it apart. These are some of the best athletes in the world out of any sport.
Absolutely.
And with exception of a few, and they get weeded out pretty quick in camp, a majority of them come in excellent shape, ready to go. And the ones that don't, they get weeded out in camp. It just is what it is. And now Bigra in Colorado as an example. You come to camp out of shape how many times in a row, you're going to get weeded out and you're not going to make it anywhere. I mean, I remember being so upset when he was traded for Ryan Graves to the Rangers.
Yeah.
And here I am a few years later, and Ryan Graves is no longer in Colorado, but I'm still going, wow, did Colorado win that trade?
He was a stud.
They get weeded out. So you have to think that some might slip through the cracks, but for the most part, the majority of players that make opening night rosters and are there ready to go are in pretty damn good shape.
Oh yeah. You'd have to think they're in as good a shape as they're going to be in all year.
Yeah. So are there a good number of injuries so far 2 games in? Yes. Does that seem strange this early? Yes. To say there's something strange going on, I'm hard pressed to say that. It just feels like it's one of those years where, you go in, you play hard, you're amped up, the crowd is back, all these things, and you get dinged up or, whatever. Until it starts to happen literally on a nightly basis where all of a sudden, like dominoes, they just start falling. I'm hard pressed to say that there's something weird going on, but I guess we'll see.
Well, the injuries that I've seen they almost look fluky, and I'll use Byfields as an example. Great young player, counting on him to be in that 2C hole in LA, and he goes into the boards kind of awkwardly, snaps an ankle. It was just sort of a weird stumble, no contact basically with anyone, and now he's gone. Who knows? Probably 8 weeks or more.
The Avs had one too. Avalanche had one. Stefan Matteau.
Right.
Had one, just kind of a weird thing in the bench area where he just kind of, I can't remember if he bumped into somebody or just whatever, and he his leg folded under him, and he wasn't seen after that. So there's some fluky things. There's, it's physical play. Nichushkin's out with an upper body injury, playing a physical game. Things happen. And when I say something strange going on, I don't mean that in like, oh my God, the league is doing something conspiracy wise.
No.
But what I mean is something strange. Like, is there something in the water? Is there something going on in that regard? And in that sense, again, I'm hard pressed to say there's something strange going on until this becomes a nightly occurrence for the next few weeks or month or so, where now, okay, this guy down. Geez, just yesterday he went down and now today he's down. Okay, now, then all of a sudden you're like, something weird is happening here. But until then, it just is right, wrong, or indifferent. I think it just is what it is.
Two major items of fallout from this are going to be successful organizations, regardless of their opening night roster. Successful organizations 6 months from now are going to have great depth of within their system. They're going to have great AHL depth. And secondly, there's going to be successful organizations are going to have the ability to juggle the cap. Yep. Because as you see, like in Toronto, you couldn't bring in Michael Hutchinson from the AHL because you got a couple of defensemen hurt. Justin Hall went down, so you had to bring Liljegren up. So you got no cap space to put a backup goaltender. So they've got their emergency backup third or fourth string, their David Ayers type guy that's now on the bench should something happen to Jack Campbell, because there was no cap space to put a roster goaltender. So you've got to be able to finagle that cap, the long-term injury reserve, the night-to-night, who comes in from the A, who goes back. You got to be able to juggle that, and you better have some depth.
It's important. It's important every year. It's important every single year. But I'm going to make a prediction that it's going to be more important this year than any other year, based on what we've seen through 2 games. My prediction is your Stanley Cup champion for 21-22 is going to be the team who not only has the best depth, but whose depth comes through for them.
Exactly.
And because especially if the league's going to continue doing this bullshit COVID stuff and all this stuff, not to mention any other injuries, and you're seeing it early on. It may only be 2 games in, but you're seeing it early on. For crying out loud, Colorado put a team on the ice against St. Louis the other night that looked like a full-on AHL team. There was nobody up front on the offensive side and I love JT Compher, I love Jost, I love these guys. Burakovsky's great, but with exception of those, there was nobody that really stood out as NHL caliber producers on the front end. And so your depth is going to have to step in.
Yep.
And
It's
and
not
you're going to have to step in during down the stretch too, because I can promise you for Colorado's sake, while I'm using it as an example, this isn't going to be the first time. It won't be this isn't the first time. It won't be the last that you see McKinnon or Landeskog or Rantanen or pick a guy,
Yep.
Makar, anybody like that, Kemper, who isn't in the lineup for whatever reason, either because the league doesn't let him play because of some stupid COVID shit or an injury.
Yep.
Where they're not in the lineup. And it's not going to, and I guarantee you it's not going to be the last time that multiple of those players are out at the same time. So depth is really going to have to come in. And so at the end of the day, you know where I've stood with this for years. I've always stood with this. Yeah, there's factors, but at the end of the day, if you're a contender, if you're competitive, you have to find a way to win no matter who's in your lineup.
Yep.
No matter what's going on. It can be 3/4 of your lineup can be AHL guys, for crying out loud. But if you are a true contender, if you're truly competing, you find a way to pull out 2 points, even with those guys in your lineup. You got to win no matter who's behind your bench, no matter who's in the lineup. It just is what it is. And your Stanley Cup champions this year, your competitors this year, are going to be the teams that, even in the face of adversity, injury-wise or whatever else, are going to be guys who have Byfield, Alex Newhook, Sampo Ranta, and these guys come up and they're winning hockey games because these guys are filling the void.
Absolutely.
And the teams, and there's going to be 1 or 2 this year. And I pray on a personal note, it's not Colorado, but anything can happen. 1 or 2 teams that we predicted would be competitive this year will face the adversity. Their depth will step in and their depth will fail.
For sure.
And they will either flunk out of the playoffs if they're in the playoffs, or they won't make the playoffs at all because their depth will fail. Depth has to step up. Good for Colorado against St. Louis, battling back from 4-1 deficit to make it 4-3 and continuing to fight. That's a good sign. But early on or not, guess what? The depth didn't get the job done. And you got to find a way to produce and do it without McKinnon in the lineup and without these guys. Because you won't see McKinnon in the lineup again. I can promise you that. You won't see Landeskog at some point again. Injury, this, whatever that. So you got to figure it out. If you don't, you can only drop so many of the points in so many of these games with the depth not coming through before it adds up, and now you're not even in the playoffs.
You can get, I guess depth isn't just depth. Everybody's got a body they can put in. Not everybody's got a body that they can put in that will produce and can contribute to winning a game. More glaring at the goaltender position, you're not going to replace Landeskog. You're not going to replace McKinnon. You're not going to replace Austin Matthews or pick one, Kucherov. Nobody has anyone in their AHL system that's going to replace that guy. But if you give an opportunity to a Marty Kaut in Colorado, to a Taylor Radish in Tampa, to a Josh Hosang in Toronto, you get a couple of guys banged up, and all of a sudden this guy goes from the AHL to the top 6. Now he's got an opportunity to change the course of his career. What's he going to do with that? And that's where heroes are made and shine. When you get that opportunity, you want a guy that, like in the original 6 days, that's why nobody ever left a game with an injury. Because when there were only 6 teams, if you lost your job for a week and a half, even if you had a broken bone, you ran a genuine risk of never getting a job again, ever. Guys wouldn't come out of the lineup. Now, when you do, whether it's concussion protocol or whatever it is, you sit down for a while. And as an organization, I hope my AHL call-up goes on a ridiculous tear. I hope we find lightning in a bottle with some guy that was a 3rd rounder. Not very often that's going to happen, but as an organization, you hope it does. As the guy who had to come out of the lineup, you certainly hope it doesn't, because now what? You might be expendable. So, but you're right. Everything's got to be, those guys have to produce. They got to take that opportunity. And the successful teams 6 months from now will be looking back going, boy, oh boy, did we ever have great success with this guy that we called up or that.
Not everybody. Some people who are out of the lineup want the depth to succeed because they're the players that are irreplaceable. So if like Landeskog and McKinnon we're talking about, or Rantanen or anybody like that, they're out of the lineup, their job is secure.
Right.
Unless somebody comes in and just completely makes McKinnon look silly in how they produce. That won't happen. So McKinnon can sit injury or COVID or whatever else on the sideline watching the game going, Sampo Ranta looks good. You know, these guys look good. Awesome. Logan O'Connor killing it. You know, things like that. And they want it. Now, if you're a Logan O'Connor, if you're somebody like that, you're sitting on the sideline going, I want the team to win, but am I about to lose my job?
Yeah, right.
So you're looking at different scenarios based on players. So at the end of the day, you come to the rink every day and you want your team to be successful, whether you lose your job or not. That's your organization. That's what you want to happen. And the depth has to come through.
Yep.
There's a few teams right now that are predicted to be Stanley Cup favorites that are facing some of these injury COVID adversity. Vegas, Colorado, to name two. Those two specifically, there's more than that, and there will be more than that. But those two specifically right now are teams that O'Connor, Ranta, Newhook, Maltsev, these guys are going to have to step up and produce and win you hockey games. At some point, Johansson and Francois are going to have to win you hockey games in Colorado if you're going to be successful, because you're not going to go an 82-game schedule with all your all-stars in the lineup for 82 games. So depth has to come through. Otherwise, Colorado flunks out of the playoffs again or doesn't make the playoffs at all. Depth is so important. It always has been, but I would argue through 2 games, if we can make a prediction this early, it's going to be more important than it's ever been this year.
Every year since the lockout, which is now been 17 years ago, every year it has gotten tougher and tougher to make the playoffs for those last 4 or 5 teams. Every year there are more teams on the outside, more good teams on the outside looking in than the years prior. So yeah, I believe because of parity, because of the depth that people are putting together, because now you're drafting from all over the world constantly, and the talent pool is much deeper than it was 20 years ago. Yeah, your depth and the depth that will perform, the depth that will produce and make an impact, those are the teams that succeed, and there's no way around it. Never count on having all your horses in the lineup for 82 games. It's not going to happen. Now you can't even ride a goaltender for more than 50 or 55, or he starts to fall apart. I mean, the days of Glenn Hall and even Marty Brodeur playing 65, 70, 75 games a year, those are gone, long gone. You're vilified if the guy plays more than 50. So there's got to be, you have to have that talent ready to come up and ready to produce, for sure. And that's what makes it interesting. It's great.
It makes it exciting and makes it all that stuff. But yeah, if you're looking at it, and when your depth has to come in, 82 game schedule finds its way down to a short little bubble real quick. And your depth has to start to producing within, pick a number, a 10, 15 game segment increment there. Otherwise, that's 10 or 15 games that you've now lost.
You don't have
in your chances, and now you got yourself a big hole. So, and that's where I'll say that, okay, it's only 2 games. I don't put a lot of stock in whether you're 2-0 or 0-2, but when depth is concerned, it starts real quick. And now if you're not careful, if the depth doesn't produce, you can go from 0-2 to 3-15 real quick if the depth isn't producing. And at that point, 3-15, not impossible, but you're looking at trouble. So depth has to come in. I was happy on a personal note, I was happy with the fight Colorado put up against St. Louis based on what their lineup was. but you've now burned one game. Now the depth against Washington on Tuesday, because the likelihood that McKinnon can play, not great. Landeskog's serving another game of his suspension. Nichushkin's still hurt. Taves is not healthy yet. So you're looking at these things and, okay, what do you do with this one? Do you burn a second game, or do you come through and produce? Because if you start burning games like this, you're going to start losing your cushion, if you will, your leeway to be able to lose a point here, a point there, whatever, and still be able to compete, even if you are a Vegas odds favorite for the Stanley Cup. You're going to lose it real quick if the depth can't produce.
Teams are too good, Evan.
Plain and simple.
Now, if you're the Vegas Golden Knights and you are without Mark Stone and Pacioretty for probably Pacioretty will be gone 6 weeks minimum. No word about Stone. Kucherov gone for quite a long stretch. They claim him to be week to week. When you see a guy like of that caliber starting to get put on LTIR, now you better hope that Peyton Krebs or somebody is going to come in and give you a 20-game run that you can count on and start putting up some numbers and win some games for you, because there are going to be too many good teams nipping at your heels. You don't have that kind of margin. What if all of a sudden Winnipeg takes flight and they become good? What if St. Louis regains form? Minnesota takes another step forward. Like, you don't have any place to hide. You don't have a dozen games to figure it out. You've got to have guys come in and when the difference between home ice and having to win everything through the playoffs on the road, or between making the playoffs and not, when it comes down to a tie or two, or a couple of wins or a couple of losses, as we say often on this show, you find yourself, a lot of teams find themselves with a, win 3 out of 4 and we're in the catbird seat. Lose 3 out of 4, we're either out of the playoffs or we lost home ice and now we're in deep trouble. Now we got to go through Vegas and through here, St. Louis or someplace to try to win. You don't want to do that. So you just don't have that much margin. Your margin is this thick. And
what would you say the number is then? Because you have to think, with so much parity, the margin is really, really thin. The margin's probably, when you're looking at injury adversity and you're looking at the depth having to come through, the margin is what? 6 games, 8 games?
It differs. If you're Colorado, and I hate to say this, if you're Colorado, you've probably got 6 or 8 games that you can stumble around a little bit. You can be without some guys. You can maybe lose a couple of points here and there that you should have gotten. But if you are Chicago, you're Minnesota, your Calgary Flames, your margin of error might be 2 or 3 games where you can really just step in it and lose 2 points to a team that you should have beaten at home. You blow a 3-goal lead or something. Your margin might be 2 games. And then those 4 points at the end of the year, you're going from 9th to 7th. So
for the sake of argument, say it's 8 games. Okay. Colorado's already burned 1 of those 8 games, just for the sake of making it. They're now on the brink, depending on what they do Tuesday against Washington, of potentially burning a second of those 8 games. So the depth has really got to come through. And with so much parity out there, if your depth doesn't come through, somebody else's will. So while your depth doesn't come through, Vegas's does. While Vegas's doesn't, Colorado's does. While Colorado's doesn't, Tampa's. Right? And so that's why it's an 8-game little window when it's nothing but your depth, right? Where secondary scoring is one thing. When all your guys are healthy, you want secondary scoring. But when all you have is your secondary scoring because your top guys are hurt or out or whatever, that's where it's all on your depth. And if it's all on your depth, your window is about 8 games. And all on depth, Colorado's burned 1. We'll see what Vegas does with their injuries. Tampa does with theirs. But Colorado's already burned 1 out of, say, 8 games. And then you don't want to burn those 8 games too early on, because then you have no room for movement later on.
Absolutely.
So figure it out, get the job done, start producing and show you can, so that a guy like McKinnon can miss a game or two. Stone, Pacioretty, Byfield, these guys can go out and you can go, you know what, we can still get 2 points. Otherwise, you're on the outside looking in. Depth is so valuable that you can't miss it.
There's another factor there that everybody has to be aware of, that's outside the room, and that is your systems. Detroit under Babcock did it really well for a really long, and Scotty did it really well for a really long time. Barry Trotz does it well. Joe Quenneville did it great in Chicago. These 2 guys are out. These 2 are in. The system still accounts for you. We can tweak our system to tighten up a little bit defensively, have a little bit better penalty kill if we're missing a top scorer for 2 weeks. We can make some changes. We can take a bottom 6 player, plug him into a first power play role or a first penalty kill team role, and he can succeed if the system around him allows for him to not have to play outside his capability. And that's where systems have to be fluid based on your personnel. And if they're not, then if you lose a McKinnon or a Pat Kane, and you try to bring a kid from the AHL up and plug in there and expect results, you give him an infinitely better chance if your system will allow him to play his game, instead of bringing this kid up and trying to make him into Pat Kane or McKinnon. It's not going to happen, not at that level. So really got to be careful with your system a little bit. You've got to be able to adjust. Successful teams, successful coaching staffs will make those adjustments on the fly and be able to do that night after night. So that really, really puts your guys in a much better position.
Yep. So we'll see what teams can do with their depth here when they face some adversity here. So episode 96, War Room the Hockey Podcast. Thanks for joining on Zoom again this week.
Absolutely. We're going to do, I will be in town for 100.
Perfect. Inching closer to 100. We'll figure something out for that and how we're going to do that. And yeah, head to the necessary social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, War Room the Hockey Podcast, at War Room the Hockey Podcast, respectfully. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and review. Hit the notification bell so you can see our videos and whatever else. And we will have, once we get markers at work and get things figured out, we'll have more standalone whiteboard sessions in their own things, separate from episodes, from our episodes. But I thought we'd at least point out some X's and O's this week. And a lot to look forward to. Season's underway. Junior hockey's underway. Things, at least in that regard, despite all the BS going on with COVID stuff, still, hockey's back. The fans are back in the seats, which is a positive. So you got to look at it that way. So a lot to look forward to. War Room the Hockey Podcast. Thanks for joining this week. And
thanks for having me. I'll see you in a couple days.
Yes. See you here in person in a couple days. I'm Evan Rauer with War Room the Hockey Podcast. We'll see you all throughout the hockey community. Cheers.